Chapter 1. Orphanage in Jacksonville, North Carolina, 1891. The warm spring sun bathed the orphanage yard as Clara watched over the younger children. Every afternoon, regardless of the weather, the children were required to spend precisely 1 hour outdoors. Those 12 and older were given various responsibilities to help maintain order. At 15, Clara was among the oldest orphans and tasked with ensuring the younger ones stayed safe and behaved during their playtime in the spacious yard. The orphanage had been built on an old plantation property that had been abandoned during the Civil War. The original house had been burned down, so a large building had been built in its place. There was a fenced yard that had a few shade trees and lots of wild grass. Most of the children stayed close to the building, but a few would wander along the fence. One corner of the yard couldn't be seen from the building because of a huge shade tree and tall grass. One child always left the group of children and spent his hour of free time by himself in this small area, which he considered his hideout. This child was Clara's 7-year-old brother, Cooper. Clara walked around an area of packed dirt where most of the children were kicking a ball around to each other. She counted heads and noticed one child was missing. She immediately knew who it was. Should she leave the group of other children and go after him? She knew that the director, Mrs. Carter, expected her to keep all the children together. Mrs. Carter didn't like it when the children went to the edge of the yard, even though there was a high fence to keep them all inside. If Mrs. Carter found out Cooper was missing again, Clara knew she would punish him. "Lisa, Cooper is gone again," she finally called out to her. She was only 13, but Lisa was good at keeping the younger children entertained while Clara slipped away to collect her brother. Lisa instantly knew what Clara meant and smiled. Clara suspected Lisa liked it when Clara put her in charge. "I won't be gone long," Clara reassured her and took off running towards the corner. Sure enough, there was Cooper sitting on the ground among the tall grass. He had tried to make himself small enough so he couldn't be seen. Clara didn't have the heart to tell him that she could always find him because she could see his bright red hair through the grass. "Cooper," she called softly. "Go away," the small boy called back gruffly. Clara sighed. She knew he hated living in the orphanage. She didn't blame him. She hated it too. They both had been living there for the last year after their father brought them there so he could find a job to support them. He had lost his previous job when their mother had become sick, and he had taken too many days off to care for her. After their mother's passing, Clara's father made the difficult decision to move to a larger city in search of work. They were also facing eviction from the small house they had been renting. Before leaving, he assured Clara and her younger brother Cooper that he would return for them once he found a job and a new place to live. He promised them that their stay in the orphanage would be temporary, but deep down, Clara knew her father wasn't telling the truth. She didn't know how she knew that, but it was reinforced when her father refused to look her in the eyes when he made that promise. Sure enough, a few months after he left, Mrs. Carter called Clara into her office and informed her that her father had signed away his rights to her and Cooper. Clara was very angry that her father had actually come to the orphanage to sign the papers and hadn't bothered to say goodbye. She hadn't been very close to her father, so she was mostly angry because of Cooper. He had been asking daily when their father was going to come get them. She had to tell Cooper he never would. Cooper didn't take it well. He was just a young boy whose life as he knew it had totally changed within a few short months, and he didn't understand why. All he knew was that both his parents were gone, and he was living in an orphanage where he only saw his older sister once a day. The orphanage had strict rules about keeping boys and girls separate, except during the required hour of playtime in the yard. Ever since Cooper found out about their father, he had done his best to run away from the orphanage. Luckily, he was found each time, and after a few months, he stopped trying to leave. Clara had done her best to comfort him and let him know she would always be there for him, but she didn't know if he would ever get over the loss of both their parents. After a few minutes, Clara was able to encourage Cooper to follow her back to the rest of the group. When they finally arrived, it was time to go back inside. As soon as the group of children began to re-enter the orphanage, with Clara at the rear to make sure all the children were accounted for, the director, Mrs. Carter, walked up to her. "Please come to my office, immediately," the woman ordered her. Clara's heart dropped. Was Cooper going to get in trouble again? She wished Mrs. Carter was a little more understanding with her brother, but she also wished Mrs. Carter wouldn't keep holding her accountable for her brother's actions. She nodded, bent down to give Cooper a hug goodbye, and walked quickly to Mrs. Carter's office. When she arrived, the door was open, so she peeked inside. She saw a tall man standing in the room. When he saw her, he beckoned. "Are you Clara?" he asked. He didn't smile, but she did notice he had kind eyes. Clara slowly walked into the room, wondering why the man was in Mrs. Carter's room. She felt relieved when Mrs. Carter came into her office. "Sit down, Clara," Mrs. Carter instructed. She waited until Clara had sat down on a hard wooden bench. The tall man also sat down after Mrs. Carter. "This is Mr. Wilson," Mrs. Carter informed Clara. "He is employed at Mary's Home for Girls. They take in girls who might need a second chance. They only have room for about 10, but they have an opening. I have decided it would be best if you went to live there." Clara felt confused. What was she talking about? Her confusion must have shown on her face because Mr. Wilson stepped in with more of an explanation. "I work for a couple named Mr. and Mrs. Davis," Mr. Wilson explained. "They own a large home and aren't able to have their own children. They decided to take in orphan girls who needed a chance at a better life. We have taken a few other girls from this orphanage. Mrs. Carter feels you are a good choice to fill our opening." "But what about Cooper?" Clara uttered. "Who is Cooper?" Mr. Wilson asked, looking at Mrs. Carter for an explanation. "Cooper is her little brother," Mrs. Carter informed him. Mr. Wilson looked apologetic as he addressed Clara. "I'm sorry, but Mr. and Mrs. Davis only takes in girls. I'm afraid your brother will not be able to come with you." "But," Clara tried to argue, but Mrs. Carter interrupted. "This will be your only chance, Clara. If you decide to stay here because of your brother, we will choose another girl. But remember, you will need to leave in a few years when you are 18. I decided to give you this chance because you are a hard worker and learn fast." "Let me explain," Mr. Wilson interrupted again. "If you choose to come, you will learn many skills. You will be able to use these skills when you are an adult and ready to live on your own." "What kind of skills?" Clara asked. "Mrs. Davis will make sure you know how to cook, garden, sew, do laundry, and many other skills. They also require each young lady go to school that is held in a room of the home. When you are old enough, you will be able to easily find a job to support yourself. Or, if you choose to marry, you will be able to care for your own house and children." Clara thought quickly. The last thing she wanted to do was leave her brother. She knew he would see it as abandonment on her part, but she was already 15. She could go with Mr. Wilson and learn these skills that Mrs. Davis was willing to teach her, and in a few short years she would be able to get a job and support Cooper on her own. "If I go, can I come and visit Cooper?" Clara asked Mrs. Carter. The older woman hesitated, but Mr. Wilson answered her question. "Mary's Home for Girls is not very close to this orphanage. It will be difficult to make sure you get to visit your brother regularly. If you explain your desire to Mrs. Davis, she might have an idea on how you can keep in touch with Cooper." Clara heard Mr. Wilson's words, but was watching Mrs. Carter. The woman's lips thinned while Mr. Wilson talked, and Clara knew Mrs. Carter wouldn't make it easy to visit and stay in touch with her brother. Mrs. Carter looked at Mr. Wilson. "Maybe we should choose another girl." "No," Clara blurted out. "I want to go with Mr. Wilson." She made her decision instantly, and she hoped she wouldn't regret it. Mr. Wilson looked pleased at Clara's words. "If you would like to come with me, you may. Just know that I can't promise anything about your brother." Clara nodded her understanding. "Can I say goodbye to Cooper?" "Of course," Mr. Wilson agreed. "But please, don't take too long. We need to leave as soon as possible." "Don't take any clothing with you," Mrs. Carter instructed her. Clara nodded again. She knew that her extra dress and nightgown would be given to another child. She only had a few personal possessions. She quickly left the office and ran up the stairs to the room she shared with all the girls in her orphanage. She was relieved when she saw that no one was in the room. She went to the bed she used and lifted the thin mattress. Using her fingers, she felt for a small tear in the fabric. She slid her hand inside and removed a small bag. In this bag held all that was important to her. There was a small Bible that belonged to her mother and a brooch that her father had given to her mother when they married. The brooch wasn't worth anything. The metal was tarnished and scratched, but it was her mother's, and so, to Clara, it was priceless. She had hidden it in her mattress when she first arrived at the orphanage, knowing that she needed to keep her belongings away from other girls who might steal them. She remembered that first night she had stayed awake until she knew all the other girls were asleep. Then she had carefully tore a hole in the thin fabric of the mattress and hid the bag. Clara wanted to grab an apron, but she knew Mrs. Carter wouldn't want her to take it. She only hoped Mrs. Davis would have some aprons for her to wear. She left the bedroom and went to find her brother. Chapter 2. Mr. Wilson pulled the small buggy up to a large, beautiful home. Clara couldn't believe how big it was. This was going to be her new home? Mr. Wilson had spent most of the drive talking about what life would be like at Mary's home for girls. She had left the orphanage in tears, her heart breaking because she had to leave Cooper. As she had suspected, Cooper hadn't understood why Clara was leaving the orphanage. He had grown angry and pushed her away, yelling at her that he never wanted to see her again. Clara almost changed her mind as she watched her brother run down the hall away from her. Then she remembered all the skills she was going to get to learn, and she knew she needed to take this opportunity. She wished she could help him understand why she needed to leave. Mr. Wilson immediately picked up that Clara was upset, so he began talking to her as the buggy left the orphanage. At first, Clara didn't pay attention, but eventually she started to listen to what he was saying. He told her about how Mary's home for girls had come to be. Evidently, Mrs. Davis had given birth to a stillborn girl about 10 years previously. They had named the baby Mary. Mrs. Davis wasn't able to have any more children, so they decided to convert their large plantation home into a girls' home in honor of their baby. Mr. Wilson told her a little bit about some of the other girls who lived at the home. As Clara was able to calm her emotions down and listen to Mr. Wilson, she knew she was going to love living there. It sounded like a dream come true, and when the buggy stopped in the long driveway in front of the home, she knew it was. The house had been built in a large plantation style. It was 3 stories high and had been painted white. There were 4 pillars in the front with a large wraparound covered porch. Large trees dotted the landscape to give it shade. It was the most beautiful house she had ever seen. Mrs. Davis immediately greeted her as Mr. Wilson brought her inside. She was the most beautiful woman she had ever met. She had blonde hair that was arranged in a loose bun. She had on a beautiful sky blue dress. Her blue eyes sparkled as she greeted Clara with a huge bear hug. As Mrs. Davis hugged her, she closed her eyes and thought of her own mother she missed so much. Over the next few hours, she was shown her new home. On the first floor was the kitchen, dining area, and a sitting room. The second floor held 5 large bedrooms. She gasped when she saw the bedroom that was to be hers. There were 2 large beds with a small bedside table next to each of them. There were 2 wardrobes and 2 small desks. Clara noticed the room had 2 windows with a bench under each of them. She couldn't believe that she wouldn't have to share her bed with someone else. Mrs. Davis introduced her to the girl who was to be her roommate. She was a young girl named Carrie who was 10 years old. Carrie had been living at the home for 2 years. Clara noticed that Carrie kept her left arm tucked inside the folds of her dress. She later learned that when Carrie had been little, boiling hot water had accidentally spilled on her arm. The burns left the skin on her arm shriveled and red. She had very little use of her arm. Mrs. Davis then asked another girl, Sophie, to give her a tour of the rest of the house and surrounding gardens and land. While Sophie showed her around, Clara learned that she was a year younger than her and had been at the home for about 6 months. The gardens and land looked like the Garden of Eden to Clara. They were full of various colored flowers and a place for vegetables. Sophie explained that they grew all their own vegetables, and every girl was expected to spend time working there. Clara also saw a large barn with a few horses grazing in a field nearby. By the end of the tour, she knew she had made the right decision. Chapter 3. 5 years later, midsummer of 1896. Clara let herself into Mary's home and quickly ran up the stairs to her room. She breathed a sigh of relief when she saw that Carrie wasn't there. She desperately needed time to herself for a while. Since she turned 18, she had been working in a textile factory. One of the rules Mrs. Davis had for all the girls was that when they turned 18, they were to find a job and learn how to support themselves. Clara had wanted to find a job sewing clothing, but she hadn't been able to. She had to settle for a job at a textile factory. She thought it would be a nice second choice since a textile factory made fabric. She had learned many skills since she had arrived at Mary's home, and her favorite was sewing. But she learned very quickly that working in a factory was very different from sewing actual clothing. She hated her job. Her boss had taken an instant dislike to her, probably because she was a girl and an orphan, living at Mary's home for girls. Her boss did everything he could to get her to quit or to get her fired. Luckily, the man who was over her boss seemed to like her and kept giving her chances to improve. Clara hadn't let Mrs. Davis know what was going on, though. She needed this job so she could get Cooper out of the orphanage. She didn't make very much money, and so she hadn't been able to leave Mary's home as she had originally planned. She was glad when Mrs. Davis seemed to understand and didn't insist she leave. Actually, she was one of 4 girls who were over 18 years of age and still living at the home. At least until recently, that is. A few months ago, a woman named Mrs. Adams from the newspaper agency had come to let Clara know about an opportunity her newspaper sponsored. Savannah, Rachel, and Sophie were also attending this meeting. The opportunity was about becoming a mail-order bride. Evidently, there had been many men who had moved west. They left the East for various reasons. Some went to find gold. Others wanted to own their own land and took advantage of the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act was a program that the government had developed where a man could get 150 acres of land that would become his if he worked on the land and developed it for 5 years. These men loved living in the West, but there was one problem. There were few women available to marry, so some of them placed ads in Eastern newspapers for wives. Clara remembered her initial reaction about this option. Who in their right mind would agree to marry a man they had never met? It was the last thing she wanted to do. But then her friend, Savannah, had decided to be a mail-order bride. She wrote a man who lived in Iowa, and a few months later, she traveled to Iowa and married him. Clara had received a letter from Savannah just a few days ago. Her friend was very happy with her new husband, Austin, and her new life. The cheerful letter made Clara think twice about her initial reaction. She had another reason to think about becoming a mail-order bride herself, and that was her brother, Cooper. Mrs. Davis had done her best to help Clara stay in touch with Cooper at the orphanage. At first, Clara would walk to the orphanage, which took about 2 hours. Mrs. Carter didn't like Clara visiting, though. She felt Cooper did better when he didn't see his sister. After Clara visited, he would be angry for days. Because of this, Clara started to visit in secret. She tried to arrive at the time when the children would be in the yard playing. Cooper always hid in his usual place. Clara was able to talk to her brother through the fence. Eventually, Cooper realized his behavior was what was keeping Clara from visiting, and he settled down. But Clara continued to visit Cooper secretly. She liked this better. When she went into the orphanage, Mrs. Carter seemed to want to chaperone each visit, and Clara liked having her brother all to herself. She made Cooper promise to not tell Mrs. Carter about her secret visits. Since she had started working, her visits to the orphanage became less and less. It seemed she was only able to visit a few times a month on her days off, which were rare. Cooper was now 12 years old, and he was starting to grow rapidly. He talked about how hungry he was, and Clara started to bring food for him that she purchased with her own money. She knew she needed to get her brother out of the orphanage soon. She also knew she wouldn't be able to just walk in and take him like she had originally thought. Cooper had told her during one of their secret visits that Mrs. Carter had informed him that he wouldn't be able to leave with Clara unless she was married and could prove she could provide for him. Clara changed out of her work dress into another lighter, more comfortable one. She found the letter Savannah had mailed to her and sat at her desk to reread it. Her friend seemed very happy with her new life. She was even expecting a baby in a few months. Clara sighed and sat the letter down. Should she consider this option of becoming a mail-order bride? As she thought about it, she knew she really didn't have another option, unless she wanted to continue working at the textile factory. Marrying another man from Jacksonville wasn't an option. The girls rarely had a chance to meet other men, and most men weren't interested in marrying an orphan girl, even though they had been taught many skills. The only time she was around other men was on Sundays at church. There had been a few young women from Mary's home who had married, but Clara knew she couldn't count on this option. She also knew Mrs. Davis was gently encouraging all the girls in the home who were over 18 to move on as soon as they could. She wanted to give this opportunity of living at Mary's home to other girls. A new girl had been added to the group almost as soon as Savannah left. Clara knew that it was her turn to leave, so another girl could take her place. After all, she was now 20 years old. Clara slipped Savannah's letter into her desk and went to find Mrs. Davis. It was time to move on with her life. She would become a mail-order bride. Clara found Mrs. Davis in the kitchen with the cook, Mrs. Moore. They were busy preparing the evening meal. Mrs. Davis smiled when Clara came into the room. "Hello, Clara," she greeted her. "How was work today? Can I talk to you sometime this evening?" Clara asked instead of answering the question. She wasn't nervous talking to Mrs. Davis. The older woman had an inner gift of making anyone she was around feel comfortable. Whenever Clara talked with her, she always felt accepted and loved. Mrs. Davis looked at her with a smile. "We can talk now if you wish. I am just in the way." Mrs. Moore snorted. "You know that's not true, ma'am, but I can finish the last of the dinner preparations and Sophie should be here soon to help." Mrs. Davis put an arm around Clara's shoulders and led her out of the kitchen and into the sitting room near the front of the house. This room was always used for any discussions with Mrs. Davis. After they were seated, Clara immediately started talking. She wanted to tell Mrs. Davis of her decision before she changed her mind. "I've decided to start the process of being a mail-order bride," she blurted out. Mrs. Davis looked surprised but pleased. "I think that is a wise decision. I know things have worked out with Savannah. I received a letter just the other day from her." Clara nodded. Mrs. Davis continued, "I don't want you to feel you are being forced to leave Mary's home, dear. You must make sure you feel good about this decision. There are other options besides working at the textile factory." Clara was surprised at Mrs. Davis's words. Was she aware of the problems she was having with her boss? Clara knew that Mrs. Davis seemed to know quite a bit of what was going on in each of the girls' lives. She seemed to have an innate ability to read minds, or know what was going on, even if she hadn't been informed. "I'm sure there could be other options for work, but I want to try this option," Clara said softly. "Then I suggest that when you have your next day off, you go to talk to Mrs. Adam at the newspaper agency. She will help you get started with this process." "I actually have tomorrow afternoon off," Clara told her. Once a month, she only had to work half a day so the machines could be cleaned and oiled. She had wanted to use her time to visit her brother, but she knew she needed to go to the newspaper agency instead. Mrs. Davis nodded. "I do need to say something to you. As much as I understand you need to move on with your life, I don't want you to feel you must marry someone you don't feel good about. Remember to listen to your heart throughout this entire process of choosing a man to write and to marry. If at any time you aren't feeling comfortable about any part of this, don't go through with it. When you are ready to leave, I will make sure you have enough money to return if you arrive and find the man you are to marry doesn't seem to be who he said he was." Again, listen to your heart, trust your instincts. I will, thank you, Clara replied. Mrs. Davis' words helped her feel much better about her decision. Have you decided what you're going to do about Cooper? Mrs. Davis asked. Clara nodded. I am hoping I can take him with me. She didn't bother saying her brother was going to go with her, no matter what. I hope you are able to find a man who will be willing to marry you and help with the care of your brother, Mrs. Davis smiled. Chapter 4. The next afternoon, Clara left the factory as soon as she could. Her boss had insisted she stay an extra hour, even though everyone else had been able to leave. It was all she could do to keep her emotions in check and continue working until her boss finally waved her away. She ran to the newspaper agency, afraid that it was going to close before she got there, and she was relieved when she saw that it was still open. She pulled on the heavy door and went inside. She saw Mrs. Adams sitting at a desk and walked in that direction. Mrs. Adams looked up and smiled. Hello, ma'am, Clara said, trying to smile. I'm Clara, from Mary's Home for Girls. Hello, Mrs. Adams greeted her. I remember you from the meeting we had last spring. Are you here to talk about that? Clara nodded nervously. Mrs. Adams stood. Follow me, please. The woman led Clara into a back office. After they were both seated, Mrs. Adams asked, What can I help you with? I have decided to become a mail-order bride, Clara said quickly. I'm so glad you have made that decision, Mrs. Adams said with a smile. Let me tell you how this is going to work. Clara quickly learned that after she chose a man to write to, they were to write no less than 3 letters to each other. She was to be as honest as possible about her situation. She was to only write one man at a time. If, after 3 letters, she changed her mind, she would be able to choose again, but Mrs. Adams was only going to give her 3 tries. If she chose to not marry the man she was writing, she was to send one last letter, letting the man know of her decision. Once there was a marriage agreement between the two of them. The man was to be the one to send money for travel expenses. Clara was to agree to give any money back to the man that was left over. After Clara let Mrs. Adams know she understood how the procedure would work, she pulled out a small stack of papers. I have a few letters here you can read through. If you like one of them, you can take it with you. If you don't like any of them, you may come and check for new letters weekly. Clara watched as Mrs. Adams took a few minutes looking through the letters. She set a few aside as she read. When she was finished, she handed Clara 3 of them. I will leave you to look through them, Mrs. Adams told her. I'll return in a few minutes. After Mrs. Adams left, Clara quickly read through the letters. The first one she quickly set aside. This man was from Oregon, and Clara didn't think she wanted to travel that far. The second one was from a man who lived in Kansas and who had 3 children. Clara could tell he was just looking for a woman to be a mother, not a wife. Even though she wouldn't have minded marrying a man with children, she wanted to be more than just a mother. She liked the last one the best. This one was from a man named Walker. He lived in a small town in Texas called Maplesville and was the sheriff. He talked about how nice the town was. She could tell he was very proud of it. He described the small businesses, the bank, a general store, and a hotel with a restaurant. There was a schoolhouse at one end of the town and a white church house at the other. Clara instantly decided she would write this, Sheriff. That evening, she wrote her first letter to Walker. She briefly let him know of her past with her mother dying and her father leaving her in an orphanage. She told him about living in Mary's home and all the skills she had learned. She also told him about her job. The only thing she didn't tell him was about her brother. She was very afraid if she told Walker that she had a 12-year-old brother she wanted to bring, he wouldn't want to write her back. She decided to tell him in her next letter. Over the next few months, she received 2 letters from Walker and wrote 2 more of her own. She enjoyed his letters. He sounded like a good man. He mostly talked about his job as sheriff. In the second letter, he mentioned he had to arrest someone for murder and was waiting for the prisoner to be transported to a larger jail in a city nearby. He talked about some of the people who lived in the town. After this second letter, she decided if he offered marriage, she would accept. In her own letters, she wrote more about her life at Mary's home and her job. The only thing she still didn't tell him was about Cooper. She was so afraid to do so. They had now been separated from each other for 5 years, and she didn't want it to become permanent. One summer day, the letter from Walker came that she was waiting for. He asked her to travel to Texas to marry him. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt a glimmer of happiness. Someone did want to marry her, even knowing her circumstances. Walker sent money with the letter, enough for traveling expenses. He also instructed her to purchase any clothing she needed. Clara carefully counted the money, immediately recognizing it was more than sufficient. She had even managed to save a bit on her own. Between the money Walker had sent and her savings, she had enough to cover travel expenses for both herself and Cooper. There was even room in the budget for a new dress and fresh clothes for him. She understood the importance of ensuring Cooper no longer looked like an orphan. The next day, she informed her boss she was quitting. Her boss assumed she was leaving because she couldn't handle the job anymore, and Clara let him believe what he wanted. The last thing she wanted to do was let him know that she was leaving to be a mail-order bride to a man in Texas. Clara couldn't stop smiling as she left the factory for the last time. She felt free. She went to the train station and purchased 2 tickets to Texas. She also sent a telegraph to let Walker know when she would be arriving. That evening, she let Mrs. Davis know she was leaving in 2 days' time. Mrs. Davis was pleased she had found a man she wanted to marry. Clara was surprised when Mrs. Davis' eyes filled with tears. "I wish you well, dear," Mrs. Davis told her. "I know that moving out of Mary's home and getting on with your life is natural and what you are supposed to do, but I will miss you. I always feel when a girl leaves, for whatever reason, they take a little bit of my heart with them. I want to thank you for letting me live here," Clara told her sincerely. "I am very grateful for all I have learned." As she dressed for bed, she told Carrie. Carrie had been aware that she was writing a man in Texas, and she thought it was quite romantic. Carrie was now 15 years old. She had told Clara when she received her first letter that she was going to be a mail-order bride as soon as she was old enough. She knew no one in Jacksonville would want her because of her damaged arm, but she thought maybe, just maybe, there was a man out there somewhere who wouldn't care about her arm. The next day, Clara decided she needed to do some shopping. She left early enough so she could talk to Cooper. Lately, the children were spending their time outdoors at different times every day, and Clara didn't want to chance missing the hour Cooper would be out. Luckily, she only had to wait a few minutes when she heard the shout of children as they left the building, running into the sunshine. Soon she heard the rustle of grass and saw her brother. "Hi, sis," Cooper greeted her. Clara returned the greeting but studied her brother. He never seemed happy to her. It was as if he was resigned to the fact that he had been abandoned by their father, and if his father didn't want him, no one else did either. "I have some news," Clara told him. Through the wooden fence, she quickly told him about Walker and the events of the last few months. When she got to the part where Walker had asked her to marry him, Cooper grew angry. "I knew it. You're leaving for good," Cooper snarled at her. Clara was afraid Cooper was going to run off before she could tell him of her plan. She quickly reached her hand through a small opening of the wooden fence and grabbed his shirt sleeve. "For once in your life, you need to listen to what I have to say and not run off." Cooper hesitated long enough for Clara to continue. "I want you to come with me." Cooper scoffed. "How are you going to do that? You know Mrs. Carter isn't going to let you take me, even if you are going to get married soon." "You're going to have to sneak out," Clara told him. She quickly explained her plan. She would meet him the next day at this same place. They would break part of the wooden fence down enough for him to squeeze through. Then they would go directly to the train station. They should be gone before it was even discovered that he was missing. For the first time in a long time, Cooper slowly smiled. "It just might work, sis." Then Cooper showed her a loose board that could easily be moved. There would be enough space for him to squeeze through. "Are you sure Walker wants me?" Cooper asked. Clara hesitated. She didn't want to tell him she hadn't yet told Walker about her brother's existence. "Of course he does," she finally said. She hated all the lies she was telling, but she promised herself she would let Cooper know the truth before they arrived in Texas. She knew she needed to do everything she could to keep her brother with her. Clara pulled out an apple from her dress pocket and gave it to her brother through the fence. "Eat this quickly. I'll be back here at the same time tomorrow. Don't let anyone know of our plans." Cooper nodded his understanding and then slipped away. Clara gave a sigh. She couldn't wait to have Cooper with her again. Chapter 5. Walker strode down the streets of his Texas town, Maplesville. He enjoyed being sheriff and made an effort to walk the main street of his town daily. He knew most people enjoyed seeing the sheriff patrolling the streets, especially after what had happened a few weeks ago, when he had to arrest a fellow citizen for murder. Luckily, the man had been transferred to a nearby city, Stockton, to await trial. His jail was empty again, just the way he liked it. He patted his pocket to make sure the latest letter from Clara was still there. It was the third one she had sent, and it was also the one that made him finally make the decision to offer marriage. He could tell she wasn't afraid of change. She had had so much in her own life, he knew she would be able to handle anything that came along. She had sent a telegram just over a week ago, and he knew she would be arriving the next day. He was glad, for he was ready to get on with his life. It took him a long time to make the decision to send for a mail-order bride. He didn't think there would be a woman alive who would want to travel to Texas to marry him. He spent a few evenings a week with his best friend Mark and his wife Jan. Mark was the town's reverend. Every time he was with Mark and Jan, he would watch the two together. It was obvious Mark and Jan were happy, and it made him a bit envious. He wanted to marry and start his own family, only there weren't any women in his town or the surrounding towns he was interested in. Either they were too old or too young. Except for Jennifer, the daughter of the general store owner. He knew she would marry him in a heartbeat, but he had no desire to pursue a relationship with her. She was spoiled and very selfish. So he had quietly sent off a letter back east. He didn't know why he chose a newspaper agency in North Carolina. Probably because South Carolina was where his mother had been born, and that would have to be a good enough reason. A few weeks later, he received Clara's letter. He enjoyed writing to her, and soon he decided he had nothing to lose but the money for her train fare. Last night, he informed Mark of his intent to marry Clara. He wanted Mark to marry them. Walker smiled to himself as he remembered Mark's reaction. In Mark's mind, no one should marry so quickly after meeting. Why couldn't they take time and get to know each other better, to make sure marriage was what they both wanted? But Walker was firm in his desire to marry Clara when she arrived. He had committed to her through his letter, and he didn't feel he could change his mind. Eventually, Mark did agree to perform the marriage, as long as he would be able to have a few minutes to talk to Clara privately first. Walker agreed to this request. He leaned against a wooden post used to tie horses and lazily watched the people in town. A few people greeted him, and he smiled back. Suddenly, he was pushed from behind and saw a small boy run past him. He frowned when he saw who it was. It was Tom's youngest son, Cliff. Tom was the one who he had arrested for murder. Tom left two sons behind, Dan, who was around 20 years of age, and Cliff, who was about 12 years old. Dan was now taking care of Cliff, but Walker wasn't sure how long this was going to last. Sure, Dan was an adult and should be able to care for his younger brother, but Walker knew Dan had a short fuse. Dan was very angry that Walker had arrested his father and threatened revenge. Walker was afraid Cliff was going to be caught in the middle. "Cliff," Walker called out. He saw the boy slow down a bit and then speed up again. Walker shook his head and took off at a run to catch up with the boy. "Cliff," Walker said again as he grabbed the boy's arm. Cliff didn't say anything but struggled to get free. Walker just held his arm firmly until the boy stopped struggling. "Shouldn't you be in school?" Walker asked. Cliff shrugged his shoulders, refusing to look at him. Walker kept a hold of the boy's arm because he knew if he released him, Cliff would try to get away. "Isn't the school in the other direction?" Walker asked as he pointed behind him. "It's lunchtime," Cliff mumbled. Walker grinned. He knew lunch had been over an hour ago. Either you head back to school, or you can spend the afternoon with me." He waited for Cliff to make up his mind. He didn't want to send Cliff home. Who knew where his brother was at this time of day? "I'll go back to school," the boy finally mumbled. "Do you promise? If I see you again before school is out, you will be spending the rest of the day with me." "I promise." Cliff lifted his eyes and glared at Walker defiantly, but immediately dropped them again. Walker let go of his arm and Cliff took off towards the schoolhouse. Walker watched him go and sighed. He wished he knew what to do about Cliff's home situation. If the boy didn't get guidance, he was going to turn out like his older brother and father. But was he the best one for the job? He didn't know. Cliff definitely showed he didn't want anything to do with him. He knew that some of the older matrons in the town wanted to send Cliff to an orphanage, but Walker had stepped in and stopped that from happening. He didn't feel good about that decision, but he also knew he needed to come up with an alternative quickly, or he would have to give in and allow the matrons to do as they wished. No one wanted a child around with the problems Cliff had, especially given who his father was. Walker decided to go back to his office, which was located in the middle of the town. He had some paperwork to finish. He also wanted to make sure the small home the town provided as part of his wages was as clean as he could get it. As the train moved along its tracks towards Texas, they had just left Stockton and would be arriving in Maplesville in a few hours. Everything had gone smoother than she had hoped with her plans to bring Cooper with her. Mrs. Davis had wanted to take her to the train station, but Clara had been able to talk her out of it, claiming she didn't like long goodbyes. Mrs. Davis had smiled at her, as if in understanding, and then handed her some money. "This is in case you need to return to North Carolina for any reason." Mrs. Davis also handed her a sealed letter with instructions to not open it until she had arrived in Texas. Clara had left Mary's home for the last time early that morning. She wanted to make sure she was waiting for Cooper at the orphanage when he came out for playtime. Luckily, Cooper came out during the usual time, and very quickly he was through the fence. Clara tried to hug him. She was so happy to have her brother with her again, but he pushed her away. "We have to hurry. I don't want to be caught," Cooper whispered. Clara gave him a pair of pants and a shirt she had purchased for him the day before, along with a new pair of shoes and a hat. She turned her back and allowed him to quickly change. She gathered up his old clothing. Then they ran towards the train station. When they arrived, Clara threw Cooper's old clothes away in a trash can. They had to wait for almost an hour before their train left, and Clara's heart jumped every time she saw someone walk toward them. She knew Cooper was equally scared someone was going to discover that he was missing from the orphanage and come searching for him. But soon they were on their way. For the first few stops the train made, Clara kept Cooper on the train with her, not even allowing him to get off to stretch his legs. The further they went from North Carolina, the less she worried that someone was after them. Now she could relax, and she started to think about her new life with Walker, a man she didn't even know, a man she hadn't told about her brother. Now she had something new to worry about. What was he going to say when he saw Cooper? Would he immediately send them back? Clara knew that she would not go back. If Walker chose not to marry her because of Cooper, she had already decided she would go to a nearby town and find work. Maybe she could travel back to Stockton. She was a decent seamstress, and she hoped she could find work and make enough to support the two of them on her own. She clutched her carpet bag and heard some paper crinkle inside. This reminded her of the letter Mrs. Davis had sent. She quickly pulled it out and started to read. What she read made her smile. It seemed Mrs. Davis somehow knew of her plans to sneak Cooper out of the orphanage. She gave Clara advice on how to handle her brother, letting her know she understood. Blood was a very strong tie. "What you reading?" Cooper asked, curiously. "Just a letter from Mrs. Davis," Clara responded as she put it away. "We are almost near Maplesville. I have something I want to talk to you about." "I know," Cooper grumbled. "You want to make sure I behave myself and not mess this up." "No?" Clara was surprised at Cooper's words. "I actually need to confess something to you." She instantly promised that from this moment on, she would not tell any more lies. She would be truthful with her brother and to Walker when she arrived in Maplesville. "What is it?" Cooper asked suspiciously. "I want you to promise me something first," Clara requested, looking in his eyes. Her heart turned over as she gazed at his face. He looked so much like their father, with his red hair and freckled face. Clara's hair was dark like their mother's. "What?" Cooper asked again. "That you never run from me again, no matter what happens. We are together now. We need to count on each other. You need to believe that I will do anything to make sure you are taken care of. I need to believe that you will give me a chance to do that and not run off." Cooper hesitated as if thinking about what she had said. Then he nodded. "Okay, sis, if that will make you happy. I won't run off again." "Good," Clara said, relieved. "Now, I know I haven't told you much about Walker. Are you scared to marry a man you don't even know?" Cooper asked. "Some, I guess. There is one thing I haven't told Walker. I haven't told him about you." "You mean he doesn't know I'm coming with you?" Cooper's voice squeaked. "No," Clara admitted. "I didn't dare tell him. I had to get you out of that orphanage no matter what. I didn't want anything to stop it. What if he doesn't want me? If he won't accept you, then I won't marry him." "Really? You'd give up getting married for me?" "Of course," Clara told him. She wished she could put her arm around him, but she knew he would push her away. "I hope he will accept you, just as he has accepted me. But if he doesn't, then I won't marry him, and we will ride the train back to Stockton. Hopefully, I can get a job sewing clothes." "Okay," Cooper agreed, but Clara could tell he was troubled. "Don't worry about it," Clara said, trying to sound as positive as she could. "I feel good about Walker. I know he will be surprised when he sees you, but I think he will be okay with it." Cooper smiled slightly and then turned his head to look out of the train window. Clara leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. That conversation went better than she hoped. Usually when Cooper heard something he didn't like, he would take off, but he had kept his word and stayed to listen. She only hoped she was right, that Walker would be okay with an added member of their family. Chapter 6. The conductor went through the train car, yelling that the next stop was Maplesville. Soon the train slowed to a stop. Clara looked out of the grimy window, trying to see if there was a man outside who was wearing a sheriff's badge, but she couldn't see one. "Are we getting off?" Cooper asked. She turned and saw that he had collected their bags in his arms and looked anxious to get off the train. "Yes," Clara said, and she stood with her own bag clutched in her arms. She took a deep breath. She knew that the next few minutes would decide the rest of her life, of Cooper's life. They stepped off the train and Clara blinked in the bright sunlight. She took a few steps away from the train and noise, looking around at her surroundings as she did. Suddenly a shadow fell over her and she looked up. Way up. There in front of her was a very handsome man. He had dark, almost black hair that was cut short, although the hair on top of his head was a few inches longer and wavy. Some of the hair fell into his eyes, and Clara was glad she was carrying her bag, for she was very tempted to brush it out of his eyes. She could see his sheriff's badge pinned on his plaid shirt. He smiled at her and her heart missed a beat. "Are you Clara?" the man asked. Clara managed to nod. She didn't understand her instant reaction to this man she hadn't met before now. She cleared her throat and answered, "Yes, sir." She felt a tug on her sleeve. "Is this the sheriff, Clara? Is he the one you're going to marry? I'm assuming you're Walker." The man nodded as he studied her face. He looked confused as his gaze bounced from her to Cooper and back again. "Who is this?" Walker asked. "This is my younger brother, Cooper," Clara said. Walker frowned. "I don't remember you mentioning a younger brother." Clara took a deep breath. "Is there a place we can speak privately? I can explain why Cooper is with me." Still frowning, Walker nodded. "My office is just down the street. We can go there." He looked at both of them, took one of the bags from Cooper, and walked down the street, leaving them to follow. Clara's heart dropped. Already she could tell this conversation wasn't going to go well. Cooper tugged on her sleeve again. The sheriff don't look too happy," Cooper whispered. "Don't worry about it," Clara smiled at him, ignoring his poor grammar. "I'm sure once he learns why I brought you, everything will be fine." But deep down, she agreed with Cooper. When they arrived at his office, Walker opened the door and politely held it so Clara could go in. "Cooper, why don't you sit on this bench?" Clara instructed her brother, pointing to a bench that had been placed just outside Walker's office. "I'll be out in a few minutes. Don't go anywhere." "I won't," Cooper mumbled and slumped down on the wooden bench just outside the building. Clara went inside and noted it felt hot and stuffy. She turned and waited for Walker to say something, but he didn't. He just looked at her. "I can explain about Cooper," Clara finally said, breaking the silence. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" Walker asked. "I don't remember you writing about a younger brother. Cooper has been living in the orphanage that our father dropped us off at. I couldn't leave him behind," Clara said softly. "He's all I have. He needs me." "Why weren't you just honest with me about him?" Walker asked calmly. "I didn't want you to decide not to send for me," Clara admitted. "I had to get Cooper out of there and the director wouldn't let me care for him on my own." "I wish you had just been honest. Is this the only reason you wanted to be a mail-order bride?" Walker demanded. Clara shook her head. "I have other reasons." "I don't like the idea of starting a marriage on a lie," Walker declared. "Are you hiding anything else?" Clara shook her head. "If you don't want to marry me, then I can just get back on the train." Walker looked puzzled. "Where would you go?" "Back to Stockton, I guess. I can sew clothes pretty well. Maybe I can find a job." Walker paced back and forth in front of her as if thinking things over. Clara bit her tongue and stayed quiet. He finally sighed and stood before her. "Tell me about your brother." "His name is Cooper. He's 12 years old. He's been in the orphanage since he was 7. He wasn't doing well there. I will do my best to not have him be a burden. He can do chores and—" "I'm not worried about him being a burden," Walker said with a low growl. "I am more worried about where he will sleep. I live in a small home the town provides for my job as sheriff. There is only one bedroom." Clara blushed at Walker's words. She knew he meant that she would be sharing the room with them. She shrugged. "I don't think he'll mind sleeping on the floor by the fire." "If I agree to marry you, will you promise to always be honest with me?" Walker asked her as he stood close to her. "I need to know that you won't hide anything from me again." Clara nodded, relief in her eyes. She knew he could have immediately demanded what money she had left that he had sent to pay for her expenses of bringing her to Texas, and then send her and Cooper on their way. "I promise." "Then I will keep my promise and marry you. We'll work out sleeping arrangements later." "Thank you, Walker," was all Clara could think of to say. "Let's get it done, then. Call your brother in here and let me talk to him." Clara opened the door and was glad to see Cooper had stayed put. Part of her was still worried he was going to run off, even though he promised he wouldn't. Cooper jumped up and looked at her, a question in his eyes. Clara smiled reassuringly. "Walker wants to talk to you." A scowl replaced the question on his face, and he slowly walked into the building. He looked surprised when Walker stuck out his hand. "I guess I should officially introduce myself. I'm Walker, Sheriff of Maplesville, and future husband to your sister." "So, you're going to still marry her?" Cooper asked as he slowly shook Walker's outstretched hand. "Yep, I'm going to still marry her. Are you okay with that?" Cooper looked surprised. "Does it matter what I think?" "Of course it does, since it affects you too." Cooper slowly nodded his head. "I'm fine with it." Walker smiled. "Good. And I'm fine with gaining a little brother. I've always wanted one." At Walker's words, Clara realized she knew very little about his family. Did he have parents or siblings? She would have to find out later. Walker looked at Clara. "The Reverend is waiting for us. Shall we go?" Clara nodded. He held out his hand, and she hesitated, then placed her hand in his. She was ready to start her new life. Walter sat in a pew with Cooper while Mark talked to Clara in his small office. He hoped he was doing the right thing. Life had taught him that not everything in other people's lives was what they might seem. He knew there was a large part of Clara's story with her brother that he didn't know. He hoped he wasn't taking on more than he could chew. He glanced down at the boy beside him. Cooper was sitting quietly, studying his hands. Walker had tried to engage him in conversation, but after receiving a few grunts from Cooper, he gave up. He looked over and watched Clara talk with Mark through the open door. His heart widened as he thought of his first glance at Clara. She was, in a word, beautiful. She had dark hair that had been placed into a bun. She wore a red and white dress that contrasted well with her hair. When he first rode away for a bride, he told himself he didn't care what she would look like, but now he was glad he was going to be blessed with a pretty wife. He looked at Cooper again. He wasn't upset that Clara had brought her brother. In fact, he knew if she had been honest with him and told him about her brother in a letter, he still would have wanted to marry her. He just didn't like the fact that she hid the information from him. He hated it when people weren't honest with him. As a sheriff, there had been many opportunities when people lied to him about certain crimes. In his opinion, problems were solved a lot quicker when everyone was honest. Mark and Clara approached him. "Let's get you two married," Mark said in his typical booming voice. "My wife has dinner ready, and she doesn't like to serve it late." He smiled at his wife to show he was joking. Walker stood and allowed Mark to position him next to Clara. Cooper and Jan agreed to be witnesses. Very quickly the words were spoken, and it was over. He heard Mark tell him he could kiss the bride. Clara's eyes widened at Mark's words, as if she wasn't sure she wanted a kiss, but Walker ignored it. He wanted to kiss his new wife, and kissing her after their vows were said was a perfect way to seal the marriage, in his opinion. He cupped her face with one of his hands and kept her left hand in his own. He bent and carefully placed his lips on hers. He felt her hand tremble in his own, and he squeezed it lightly. Walker grinned at Clara's slight gasp, and he could tell the kiss had affected her the same way it did him. He stepped away and felt a hand slap his shoulder. "Congratulations, Walker," Mark boomed. "Would you like to come for dinner?" Jan invited them. Clara didn't answer, letting Walker decide for them. Walker shook his head. "I think it would be best if we start our marriage in our own home. We can get to know each other better." Clara looked almost disappointed, and Walker wanted to take back his words. Maybe it would be all right to have dinner with Mark and Jan, but it was too late. "That's a good idea," Jan told him. "We'll invite you over another night." Soon, the three of them were on their way to his small home, and he started to feel nervous. What would Clara think of the small house the town had provided him? It had been built for one person, not a family. He would have to think of an alternative for the future. Chapter 7. Clara walked slowly beside Walker, Cooper trailing behind. She was now a married woman. She didn't feel any different than she felt before she exchanged vows with Walker, except for that kiss. It shocked her how much she enjoyed it. It seemed to go straight to her soul. She hadn't expected to feel an attraction to him this soon. "I hope it was okay we didn't have dinner with the Reverend and his wife," Walker said to her. Clara shrugged. "Can you tell me a bit about Maplesville?" "Sure." Walker started to point out various businesses as they passed. He showed her the bank, a small hotel, a boarding house, and a general store. Claire remembered he had described some of them in his letters. "There's the school at the end of the street there," Walker said as he stopped in front of the sheriff's office. "You'll be able to go to school there next Monday, Cooper." Clara smiled at Walker's words. She wanted Cooper to get some schooling more than anything. The orphanage taught a few things like basic reading and math, but she wanted more for her brother. She wanted him to have a choice of what he wanted to do with his life. "Doesn't that sound great?" Clara asked her brother. "I guess," Cooper muttered. Clara wanted to shake him. Didn't he know that things would go much better if he at least acted happier about their new life? "My home is behind the office," Walker said, and led them to a very small wooden house. Clara was glad she was standing behind Walker when she first saw it, and he didn't see her shock. He opened the door and allowed them to enter. "It's not much, I know," Walker said. "It's all the town can afford." Clara did her best to keep her face neutral as she stepped inside. The house was only a little larger than the room she shared with Carrie at Mary's home. It consisted of 2 rooms, a larger room with a small wood stove, sink, cupboard, table, and 2 chairs. All the furniture seemed to be handmade. There was a smaller room that she knew would be the bedroom that she would share with Walker. It had a bed that was barely enough for 2 with a dresser nearby, and some pegs along the walls. A bench had been built along one wall of the larger room that had some blankets folded on it. "The house is fine," Clara told Walker with a smile. "Cooper can sleep on that bench there." Walker shook his head. "I'll admit, I wasn't planning on 3 of us living here. Why don't you share the room with Cooper and I'll make a pallet on the floor. I'll come up with something else." "Are you sure?" Clara asked, looking at him in the eyes. "Yes," Walker said firmly. "I have some savings. I think there is enough to add on another room for Cooper. I'm sure I can get some men to help and it will be up in no time." Clara felt a little guilty. If she had been upfront about Cooper from the start, maybe he could have had the room ready for her brother when they arrived. She was also relieved that she wouldn't be sharing a room with Walker right away. It would give them time to get to know each other better. They spent a pleasant evening together, much nicer than she had expected. Cooper didn't say much, so Clara and Walker filled the silence. "Tell me about your family," Clara invited Walker, after the few dinner dishes had been washed and put away. Walker had given a small pocket knife to Cooper and showed him how to carve on a small stick. Cooper had gone outside and sat on the stoop, practicing what Walker had taught him. "There's not much to tell," Walker told her. "Both my parents are gone. I have a sister whom I haven't seen in years." "Why not?" Clara asked curiously. Walker frowned, as if he didn't want to answer her question. After a few moments of silence, Clara broke it. "You don't have to tell me." "No, there's no reason to not tell you. She's a few years older than me. She ran off with a man when I was about 16. It broke our mother's heart. Pa had just died in a horse accident. Losing Pa and then Louise soon after, it was too much for her. Ma died a few months later." "I'm sorry," Clara told him. She knew what it was like to lose both parents in a short period of time. Walker shrugged. "I was lucky. The town sheriff took an interest in me and helped me get through the rest of my growing-up years. I'm sheriff now because of him." Clara was glad to hear that there were other people in the world that took an interest in other people's children, like Mr. and Mrs. Davis did with her. "What do you think of Maplesville so far?" Walker asked. "It looks like a nice town. I think we'll be happy here." "Can you tell me more about your and Cooper's history?" Walker asked. "I know you wrote about it in one of the letters, but I'm betting there is more to the story." Clara quickly explained a brief version of their mother's death and father's abandonment. She spoke of the years she spent at the orphanage and how Mr. and Mrs. Davis took her in, along with 9 other girls, and taught her skills she could use to better her future. She explained that since the home was just for girls, she couldn't bring Cooper with her. She did her best to keep in touch with him, even though the women in the orphanage discouraged it. "I understand more why you brought Cooper with you," Walker said when she was finished. Clara smiled her thanks. For the first time, she felt that this decision she made to travel to marry Walker was going to be the best decision she ever made. The next few days were full of adjustments, but were also full of fun times. Clara enjoyed being able to get to know Walker more and more each day. When Cooper was at school, she spent her mornings cleaning the small house. After making lunch for her and Walker, she spent a few hours in his office, helping him with some of his paperwork. He had a huge stack of papers that had been shoved in a large drawer in his desk, and Clara went through each paper, deciding with Walker what needed to be kept and what could be thrown away. She found she enjoyed organizing his office. He had one deputy, Peter, who worked the hours when Walker wasn't. One afternoon, Walker surprised her with a picnic lunch he had purchased from the hotel restaurant. He showed her some of the trails that were behind the small town. They ate their lunch near a small stream. "This stream sometimes turns into a roaring river in the spring," Walker commented, as he threw small pebbles into the water. Clara had a hard time imagining that, since at the moment she could wade to the other side without hardly getting her shoes wet, but she could see that the river had carved out a path that was now dry. Texas was a much drier climate than she was used to, but she could also see its beauty. "Have you fished here?" Clara asked. "I used to. I haven't gone much lately," Walker told her. "The old sheriff used to take me a lot. Do you think Cooper might like to fish?" "Yes, I think he'd like that," Clara said, although she wasn't really sure if he would. Out of the three of them, he was having the hardest time adjusting. He went to school, but declared he hated it. The teacher had moved him into a class for younger students, and he was embarrassed he had been placed with children younger than him and who knew more than he did. Cooper hardly talked to either Clara or Walker in the evenings. He dragged his feet whenever he didn't want to do something, which was most of the time. He only answered questions with grunts or one-word sentences. The only thing he seemed to enjoy was carving sticks with the pocket knife Walker had given him. "Is Cooper's behavior the way he usually is?" Walker asked her. Clara shrugged. "It's hard for me to know," she admitted. "He was a very happy boy before our mother died. When our father left us at the orphanage, he shut down. I wasn't very close to our father, but Cooper was. He was only 7 years old. He shut down even more when I left a year later. He tried to run away a few times. Luckily, the police always found him and brought him back." "It sounds like you both have had a hard time of it," Walker said with sympathy. "Well, Cooper definitely has. Once I was able to live at Mary's home for girls, life got better for me." "What was living there like?" "There were 10 of us girls. It was like we were all family, all sisters. The owner, Mrs. Davis, made sure we learned things like cooking, growing vegetables, and sewing. I liked the sewing lessons the best. It was like a dream come true for me. I just wish I could have taken Cooper with me, but the home was just for girls." Clara looked down at her clasped hands in her lap. "Sometimes I felt so—" "So what, Clara?" Walker asked gently. "Guilty, I guess. Maybe I should have stayed in the orphanage so I could have been with Cooper. He felt I had abandoned him too, just like our father did." Walker shook his head. "I think you made the right decision. You had to. You learned things you never would have learned if you had stayed in the orphanage. You did what you could to make a better life for both of you." "Thanks for saying that," Clara told him. She put away the leftovers of the picnic lunch. She wondered if she would always feel guilty about leaving Cooper behind, but at least now they were together, and she was now married to a good man. They had only been married for a week, and she was starting to recognize that she had feelings for him. She felt a hand on her own, stopping her from putting the food away. She looked up and saw Walker looking at her. "What?" she started to ask, but stopped when Walker leaned towards her. "There is one thing I have been thinking about all week," Walker said softly. He leaned forward and gently touched her lips with his own. Walker hadn't tried to kiss her again since their wedding ceremony. Part of Clara was relieved. She figured he was waiting until he had the new room built, but part of her was also disappointed. Maybe he hadn't enjoyed the wedding kiss like she had. As Walker placed his lips on her own and then deepened the kiss, she instantly knew he wanted this as much as she did. It was amazing her heart didn't explode. She wanted their kiss to go on forever. But all too soon he moved away. He had removed his cowboy hat he always wore, and she could see bits of red highlight in his dark hair as the sun shone on them both. His hair was in his eyes again, and she reached up to move it off his face. "School is going to be out soon," Clara reminded him with a smile. "Yes, and I need to get back to my job." Walker helped Clara to her feet. They were soon on their way, walking back towards the town. Walker held the basket in one hand and grasped her hand with his other. It seemed they were starting to develop an eternal connection together. Chapter 8. Cooper sat in the hot, stuffy schoolhouse doing his best to keep his body still, but it was very difficult. He wasn't used to sitting for long periods of time, and he hated it. Besides, he didn't need school. He knew how to read and write, a bit. He could sign his name and do some addition and subtraction problems. What more did he need? Miss Rollins, the teacher of Maplesville, was standing in front quizzing some younger students about spelling words. It was the class he was supposed to be in. This was one of the reasons he hated school. Here he was, 12 years old, and he had been placed in a group of 8 and 10-year-olds. All because he hadn't gotten the schooling he needed at the orphanage. He wasn't up front with the other children because he had just started going to school for less than a week, and he hadn't been able to learn the spelling words. Miss Rollins told him his first spelling test would be next week. His sister Clara had been so excited that he would be able to go to school. In her mind, now that he was going to get educated, he would be able to do anything he wanted. Cooper didn't see it that way. He was glad he was no longer in the orphanage. He was glad Clara had been able to get him away, even though they had to sneak him out to accomplish that. He knew she had been very worried someone would figure out he was gone and go after them, but Cooper knew that wouldn't have happened. No one at the orphanage would have cared he was gone. In fact, he suspected that he had been replaced with another child very quickly. There were just too many orphan children who needed a place to live. He wasn't sure how he felt about living in Texas, but he guessed any place would be better than the orphanage. He looked out of the window and wished it was lunchtime so he could go outside. Maybe he would sneak away and not come back after lunch. He would tell Miss Rollins that Clara wanted him to come home for lunch. He knew she would believe him, since some of the other children did that very thing if their homes were close by the schoolhouse. He started to think about Walker. He knew Walker wasn't very happy that Clara had brought him with her, but she had held her ground, and eventually Walker had agreed to still marry her. He was glad for her, glad that Clara had a chance to have a better life, but he, for one, didn't know if he wanted to spend the rest of his growing-up years living with a sheriff. He had to admit it was nice to have a warm place to sleep and enough food to eat. He had thought about leaving so Clara and Walker didn't need to care for him, but he promised his sister he wouldn't run off, and he aimed to keep that promise, at least for the time being. "Class, you are dismissed for lunch," Miss Rollins announced. "Please return at 1:00 for the afternoon lessons. Remember, we are going to hear the stories you wrote yesterday." Cooper groaned even as he jumped up and practically ran to the door. He thought of the writing assignment Miss Rollins had given the entire school the day before. He hadn't been able to think of anything to write about. He was supposed to take something that happened in his life and write about it. Who would want to hear about a boy whose mother had died, his father had abandoned him, and had lived in an orphanage for the last 5 years? "Cooper!" he heard Miss Rollins call out. Cooper sighed and turned around. He had almost made it out the door. "Remember, we don't run, we walk in our classroom," Ms. Rollins admonished. "Yes, ma'am." He turned and walked out of the schoolroom, grabbing his lunch off a shelf as he went. When he had left the confines of the room, he took off, running as fast as he could. "Cooper!" he heard someone call. He turned and saw another boy who was his age, Cliff, running towards him. He contemplated to keep running, but he didn't want anyone following him, so he stopped and waited for the other boy to catch up. "I want to talk to you," Cliff told him. "My brother needs your help." "Me?" Cooper asked. "Yep," Cliff said as he walked nonchalantly, acting as if he didn't care if Cooper agreed to help or not. "Why does he need my help? I don't even know your brother," Cooper scoffed. "You're living with the sheriff, aren't you?" "Yeah," Cooper admitted. "The sheriff did something bad to our father, and Dan wants to get him back." "What did Walker do?" Cooper asked curiously. "Had our dad arrested for something he didn't do, and now he's probably going to be hanged." Cooper felt confused. Why would Walker do that? Cliff shrugged his shoulders. "Don't know, except Walker didn't ever like Pa. He had it out for him, I guess." "What did Walker think your pa did?" Cliff shrugged again. "It doesn't matter, right? All that matters now is helping my pa so he doesn't get hanged." "What does your brother want my help for?" Cooper scoffed. "I don't even know what's going on." "I actually don't know yet. He just wants to meet us after school tomorrow by the large oak tree, and he will tell us his plan. He wants me to help too." Cliff pointed to a large tree that was located a few yards away from the schoolhouse. A small stream ran near it. Cooper could tell it was a good place to meet, and no one would see them. "So will you do it?" Cliff asked. Sure, I guess, Cooper agreed. He didn't know what Dan thought he could help with. Maybe he wanted Cooper to talk Walker into letting his paw go. Maybe he had proof that his paw didn't really do what Walker had arrested him for. Great! Cliff looked very relieved. How about we share our lunches? Cooper smiled for the first time. Sure, what did you bring? The two boys sat down by a wooden fence. Soon they were both munching on the beef sandwiches Clara had made. Cooper suddenly felt happy. He had a friend. Clara quickly finished the last of the dinner preparations. She was so grateful that she had learned how to cook at Mary's home. Walker had expressed his appreciation of her meals more than once since she arrived. Walker had also asked her to make meals for any prisoners he had in the Maplesville jail. The night before, he had the town drunk in the jail for disturbing the peace. That morning, Clara had made a good breakfast for the man. "This is the best grub I've ever eaten, ma'am," the grizzly man had told her gruffly as he shoveled the food in his mouth, as if he hadn't eaten in a week. "Cliff," Clara called to her brother through the open door as she finished making the gravy, "can you set the table?" Her brother was sitting out on the small porch, supposedly doing some schoolwork. Cooper spent quite a bit of time out on the porch. Most of the time he was carving on pieces of wood. It was as if he couldn't get enough of the sun and fresh air. Clara wanted Cooper to learn to do simple chores to help around their tiny house. She knew he hadn't learned how to do much at the orphanage. Setting the table was one of the first things she had taught him. She wanted Walker to know that Cooper could do his part. Being married to Walker was going even better than she had expected, given that she showed up with her younger brother in tow. Clara hoped that Walker's influence would help her in raising Cooper to adulthood. Cooper came into the house and started to place 3 plates at the table. "Do you have your story written?" Clara asked him. Cooper only grunted, and she frowned. She hated it when Cooper communicated only through grunts and mumbling. "Is that grunt a yes or a no?" Clara questioned, trying to keep her frustration out of her voice. "I can help you after dinner if you wish." "No, I'm done," Cooper muttered. Clara decided she had better stop asking him questions. She heard Walker outside stomping dust from his boots before entering. She turned and smiled at him. "Dinner is ready as soon as you are," she told him. She suddenly felt shy in his presence, especially when she remembered the kiss they had shared that day. Walker nodded his head, looking at her as if trying to read what she was thinking. "I'll be ready in a few minutes. Just let me wash up." He walked to a small table and proceeded to splash water on his face. Soon all 3 of them were sitting at the table. After the blessing was said, they were quiet as they filled their plates with a thick stew and slices of freshly baked bread. "This looks great," Walker said as he took a bite of the bread, still steaming warm from the oven. "Thanks," Clara said, feeling shy again. She turned to Cooper. "How was school today?" Cooper shrugged. Walker set his spoon down and looked straight at Cooper. "From now on, at this table, we answer with words when someone asks a question." Cooper looked taken back at Walker's words. "It was okay. I made a friend." "Really?" Clara asked, glad that Cooper was cooperating. "Who is it?" "A kid named Cliff," Cooper said. Clara noticed that Walker had a strange look on his face. "I know Cliff. He likes your sandwiches," Cooper told Clara. "We shared our lunches today." "I can pack an extra sandwich tomorrow," Clara offered. "He wants me to come out to his farm sometime." "It's good you were making friends," Walker said. "But I don't want you to go to his farm." "But," Clara started to interrupt. She didn't understand why Walker would try to stop the first friendship her brother likely ever had. "Why not?" Cooper asked, a scowl on his face. "I have my reasons," was all Walker would say. "You can invite him here if you want," Clara was quick to say. Cooper refused to talk any further, and dinner was finished in silence. Cooper then asked to be excused, and then left the house to sit on the porch again. Clara wanted to call him back, but decided it would be best to let him go. "Can you tell me why you don't want him to go to Cliff's farm?" Clara asked quietly, hoping Cooper wouldn't hear through the open doorway. "I want him to stay away from Cliff's older brother," Walker said. I had to arrest their father for murder a few weeks ago. He was transferred to a bigger jail nearby in Stockton just before you arrived. He will probably end up hanged. Dan is very angry at me. Clara felt relieved at Walker's words. He was trying to protect Cooper. I made some apple cobbler for dessert, Clara said, changing the subject. That sounds great. Walker smiled at her. After dinner, Walker dared to kiss Clara on the cheek in thanks. I need to check on things before bedtime. He left the house and almost stumbled on Cooper, who was sitting on the stairs. As Walker was about to step around him and continue on to his office, he sat down next to the boy. Are you happy living here with Clara and I? Cooper shrugged, but seemed to notice the frustrated look on Walker's face and quickly answered, Anything's better than the orphanage. Clara loves you, you know. She risked a lot to get you out of there, Walker commented. I know. I'm glad she did. I had plans to run away before Clara came to get me. You could have a good life here if you give it a chance. I know you might think I don't want you around. That's not true. I just didn't know about you. But now I know about your story, why Clara did what she did. I'm thinking it will be nice to have you around. Cooper smiled for the first time since he arrived. Walker slapped his hand on Cooper's back. Why don't you come with me to my office? What will I do there? Cooper asked, trying to sound like he didn't care what Walker answered, but Walker could tell he was curious and that he wanted to come. I'm sure I can think up something, Walker told him. He headed towards his office, the boy following behind him. The two of them spent a few hours together, and Walker actually enjoyed having Cooper around. He knew Cooper just needed some guidance, and he was willing to take on the responsibility. Not only for Clara, but because Cooper needed him. He wanted to give Cooper a chance, just like the old sheriff had with him when his mother died. Chapter 9. The next day after school, Cooper followed Cliff to the oak tree. When they arrived, he saw who he presumed was Dan standing against the trunk smoking a cigarette. He tossed it to the ground when he saw them coming and ground it into the dirt with the heel of his scuffed, worn boot. Cooper looked at Cliff's brother and instantly felt a dislike for him. There was something about his eyes that didn't feel or look right. This is Cooper, Cliff told his brother breathlessly as if he had been running. Cooper noticed his brother seemed nervous. The man looked Cooper up and down and turned to Cliff. He's not very big, but he'll do. Cooper felt resentment at Dan's words. He knew he was smaller than most boys his age, but he figured he'd start growing now that he had regular meals. He wanted to make an excuse and leave, but he was afraid of what Dan would do. Did Cliff tell you what I wanted? Dan growled at him. It's just that you need help getting your pa out of jail. The sheriff thinks our pa killed someone and arrested him. Since you're living with him, we want your help to get our pa back, Dan said to him in a tone of voice that made it clear to Cooper that he wasn't asking, he was ordering. Cooper felt a chill at Dan's words. Would Walker really arrest someone who didn't do something wrong? He didn't know Walker well enough to answer that, but he also didn't know Dan at all. The way Dan was talking, he expected Cooper to take him at his word. I don't know what you think I can do, Cooper admitted. I don't know Walker that well. I've only been here for a few days. I have a plan, and you're going to help us, Dan practically ordered. And I don't have to say you better not tell anyone? Cooper's eyes widened at Dan's words. It sounded like Dan was threatening him. He looked at Cliff, who had his eyes to the ground. He noticed Cliff's hands were shaking a little. I don't think I want to help, Cooper said, and turned to walk away. He felt a big hand grab his arm painfully. If you don't agree to help, your sister's life might be in danger, Dan told him, his face right in Cooper's face. Cooper could smell the awful scent of liquor and cigarette smoke on Dan's breath. He cringed and glared at Cliff for getting him in this mess, but Cliff still was looking at the ground. Do we have an understanding? Dan asked. Cooper slowly nodded. He didn't want anything to happen to Clara, and from what he could tell, Dan could really hurt his sister. Good, good, Dan laughed and released Cooper, giving him a shove as he did so. Cooper almost fell to the ground, but was able to keep his balance at the last minute. Here is what you are going to do." Over the next few minutes, Dan told him exactly what role he wanted him to play. Cooper did his best to keep his face neutral as Dan talked, a skill he had learned early on at the orphanage. His gut was telling him that he needed to act like he was willing to do what Dan wanted. He didn't know how he was going to get out of this mess. Dan left as soon as he finished talking, making sure no one saw him. He ordered Cliff to follow in a few minutes after making sure Cooper told no one and cooperated, understanding that his sister's safety was at stake. Cooper refused to even look at Cliff after his brother left. This was what he got for trusting someone. He should have known making a friend was too good to be true. Dan had told him that the plans were going to be carried out the next evening. He had one day to figure out a way to get out of this mess and to protect his sister in the process. The evening at dinner, Clara did everything she could to get Cooper to talk, but he refused. When Walker again reminded him of the family rule, he jumped up from the table, knocking his chair down behind him. "Leave me alone," he yelled, and ran out of the house. Clara started to stand and go after him, but Walker placed a hand on her arm. "Let him go." Clara wanted to argue with Walker, but in the end she stayed seated. "I don't know what's wrong with him. I mean, we haven't lived together for many years, but I have never seen him so angry. Something's wrong." Walker looked concerned. "He's had a lot of adjustments. Maybe he just needs time." Clara shook her head. "Something's wrong. I wonder if something happened at school. Maybe I should go talk to Miss Rollins. Let's finish our meal and I'll help you clean up. Then we'll try to talk to Cooper together and see if we can't get him to tell us what's wrong. If that doesn't work, we can talk to Miss Rollins." Clara smiled at Walker, relieved that he believed her. He really was a good man. Later that evening, the three of them were sitting on the small sofa, with Cooper in between them. "I know something is wrong," Clara told her brother. "You need to trust us and let us help." "What's going on?" Walker asked. "Are you having a hard time with your schoolwork?" Cooper shook his head. "School's too easy." "What is it then?" "I can't tell you, okay? If I tell you, then..." "Then what?" Clara asked. "I'm trying to keep you safe, okay?" Cooper shouted. Clara felt confused. Why would he be worried about her safety? "Cooper, it's my job to keep you and your sister safe. Is there something I should know about?" Walker asked firmly. Cooper shrugged, but his face looked indecisive, as if he wasn't sure what he should do. Clara prayed that he would trust them and explain what was going on. "If I tell you, can you promise that Clara won't be hurt?" Cooper asked, looking Walker straight in the eyes. Walker nodded. "I promise I will do everything in my power to protect both of you. I love your sister, and believe it or not, I kind of like having you around." Clara gasped at Walker's declaration of love. He loved her? They hadn't been married very long. How could Walker even know he loved her? Cooper smiled slightly. They both stayed quiet and let Cooper have the time he needed to think. Finally, he nodded his head. "Okay, Cliff told me that his brother wanted to talk to me after school today." "Why would Cliff's brother want to talk to you?" Clara asked, but quieted when Walker shook his head slightly as if asking her to keep quiet. "So did you meet with him?" Walker asked. Cooper nodded. "Cliff went with me. I guess Dan is angry you arrested his pa. He wants to get revenge. He told me he had a plan, and I had to help or he was going to hurt Clara." Walker didn't look alarmed at Cooper's words. "Can you tell me his plan? I promise, Cooper, nothing is going to happen to your sister. It's good you want to protect her, but sometimes a man needs to recognize when he needs help from someone else." Cooper was silent for a long time. Clara followed Walker's example and didn't say anything, although she desperately wanted to put her arms around her brother and insist he tell them what he knew. "He wants me and Cliff to pretend like we are going to rob the bank. He's going to hide, and when you show up, he's going to shoot you unless you promise to release his paw." Cooper said the words as quickly as he could. He kept his head down as he talked, but then looked up. Clara could see tears glisten in his eyes. The last time she had seen Cooper cry was when she had to tell him their father had abandoned them. "Can you really keep Clara safe?" Walker nodded firmly. Yes, I promise. Nothing will happen to Clara. You did the right thing in telling us. He stood and started to pace, then turned to face them both. What I am going to tell you can't leave this room. Clara and Cooper nodded. Dan's and Cliff's pa shot a man in cold blood over a lost poker game. He claims it was in self-defense, but there were witnesses saying otherwise. I had to arrest him, and later he was taken to stay in the larger jail in Stockton. Around these parts, if someone kills someone else, they're hanged, and Dan knows that. Clara felt fear at his words. She knew when a man was angry like Dan seemed to be, sometimes they did everything they could to get what they wanted. What can you do? Can you go arrest Dan to stop him? She asked fearfully. I can't arrest Dan. I have no actual proof that he really plans to kill me, Walker explained. But Cooper just told you. I do believe Cooper, but I can't arrest Dan right now. But I do have a plan of my own. Walker turned to Cooper. I'm going to need your help. Cooper sat up straight. Right in front of Clara's eyes, she could tell Cooper was growing up and becoming a man. It seemed he felt proud that Walker would ask for his help. I can help, Cooper said eagerly. Walker nodded. Good. Here is what I want you to do. I want you to go ahead and pretend to rob the bank with Cliff. Carry out the plan exactly like Dan told you to. What? Clara squeaked. That's your plan? Hear me out. Walker held up his hand. I'll get backup from my deputy and get some other friends to help. Let them know what is going on. We'll flush Dan out. But, do you think you can do that? Walker asked Cooper. Cooper swallowed but nodded his head. Sure, I can. Can I help? Clara asked. She decided if they were going to go ahead with this crazy plan, she should be able to do her part. Yes, Walker told her. You can make plans to go visit Jan, the Reverend's wife. Clara frowned. That's not helping. It is helping. It is getting you in a safe place so Cooper and I don't have to worry about you. But you and Cooper could be in danger, Clara argued. Maybe I could. Just do as Walker says, Cooper told his sister. We just got back together. I don't want anything else to stop that. Clara looked at Cooper and then at Walker. She slowly nodded. Okay, she finally agreed. They spent the rest of the evening going over their plans. Walker made Cooper tell him exactly what Dan and Cliff had said to him multiple times. He instructed Cooper to not tell Cliff what was going on, even though Cooper was almost sure Cliff didn't want to be involved any more than he did. Walker didn't want to chance that Cliff would tell his brother. He promised Cooper that Cliff wouldn't be punished for what his brother was making him do. Early the next morning, Cooper set out for school, and Walker went to talk to Peter and other friends. Clara knew that everything was going to happen that evening. She couldn't seem to concentrate, she was so scared. She started to wonder if coming to Texas was the right thing to do. What if Cooper got hurt or even killed? Maybe she should have left him at the orphanage. At least he would have been safe there. She remembered that Walker had told Cooper that he loved her. When had that happened? Did she feel the same? She didn't know if she loved him, but she enjoyed being around him. That evening, Walker didn't show up for dinner and Cooper hardly ate anything. Clara didn't say anything, just cleaned up the leftovers when they were done. Clara found she couldn't eat anything either, she was so nervous. Walker had told her to wrap some bread in a towel with the idea that she was going to visit Jan and was bringing some bread to share. He told her he wanted her to leave an hour before sunset. At the appointed time, Clara walked towards the Reverend's house, trying to act like she was just going on a visit. She tried not to look around and notice anyone who could be watching her. She didn't know who she would be looking for anyway. She had no idea what Dan looked like. She was relieved when she arrived at Jan's house. After a quick knock, the door opened immediately, and she slipped inside. "Thanks for letting me come," she told Jan as she handed her the wrapped bread. She cringed when she noticed that the bread was partially smashed. "I'm glad you are here," Jan told her. "Did you bring anything to do?" Clara shook her head. "Do you know how to knit?" Clara shook her head again. "Why don't I teach you? You can make a scarf for Walker or your brother. Winter will be here before we know it." The last thing she wanted to do was spend the evening learning how to knit, but she also knew that Jan was trying to keep Clara's mind off what might be happening. Clara nodded. That sounds like a good idea. Over the next few minutes, Jan showed her how to do some simple knitting stitches. The two women sometimes talked and sometimes were silent as they both worked on their knitting. Jan's husband Mark came in for a few minutes to make sure they were okay and to give Clara an update. Everything is going to plan, he reassured Clara. She didn't know if she should feel relief or not at Mark's words. Part of her wanted the plan to fail so both Cooper and Walker would be out of harm's way, but she also knew that her husband was a sheriff and she needed to trust him. She couldn't always be worried or fearful for Walker every time something like this happened, or when he performed his sheriff duties. Walker nodded at Cooper, giving him his reassurance and his permission to meet Cliff at the agreed-upon place. He was proud of the boy. Once he realized Walker was going to do everything he could to keep his sister safe, as well as bring Dan to justice, he did everything he could to help. He watched as Cooper slipped into the dusty evening. He took out his handkerchief and wiped his forehead. It was going to be a hot evening. He nodded to a man he had just made a temporary deputy that morning, Luke. He had grown up with Luke and trusted him. Luke started to walk up and down the main street of Maplesville. If Dan was watching, he was hoping the man wouldn't suspect that Luke was now working for him, and would take him for a citizen of the town taking a walk. Earlier that day, Walker had also spent time with the banker, Mr. Wells. It took a while, but he was finally able to convince the man to pretend he didn't know of the plan to have his bank robbed. He did admit that he was glad Tom was no longer living in their town, and he wanted Dan to be caught. Walker looked at his timepiece and then slowly moved closer to the bank, doing his best to stay in the shadows behind the buildings. He soon was in position and watched as Cooper and Cliff tried to get into the bank. When the front door wouldn't open, they separated, Cooper going to a side door with the plan to break a window in order to get inside, and then let Cliff in through a back door. Walker studied the surroundings carefully, and he soon saw a dark shadow against the building next door to the bank. He would bet that it was Dan. He heard the faint sound of breaking glass, and soon Mr. Wells ran out of the building. "Someone get the sheriff," he called to Luke, who just happened to be walking in front of the bank. "Two boys just broke into the bank and are trying to rob it." Luke nodded his head. "Are you okay?" he asked Mr. Wells. "Is anyone else in the building?" The banker shook his head. "It's just me, hurry!" Walker watched Luke run towards their office as if obeying Mr. Wells' request to get the sheriff, but then veered off to get in position behind the general store. He was sure Dan didn't see Luke disappear. He watched as the shadow moved, and sure enough, it was Dan. After a few minutes, Dan came out of his hiding place and walked boldly towards the banker. "Maybe I could help," Dan called to Mr. Wells. "Can you tell me what happened?" Mr. Wells turned when he saw Dan, and he pretended to look relieved. "Don't you have a younger brother?" "Yes, his name is Cliff," Dan agreed. "Well, I think he's one of the boys who is in there." Mr. Wells pointed to his bank. Dan sounded shocked. "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. I know everyone in this town. Are you going to do something about it?" Walker knew it was time to show himself. He hoped that Luke was in his place. He knew Peter had stationed himself in the building across the street. Hopefully Peter had Dan in his sights. He left his hiding place and started to run towards the bank. "Hey, there's the sheriff," Mr. Wells called when he saw him. "There are two boys in the bank. They are trying to rob it. You need to arrest them." "Are they armed?" Walker asked. In the corner of his eye, he saw Dan pull a gun from under his shirt and point it at Walker. A gun went off, and Dan dropped to the ground. It was over. Peter had done his job. "You are under arrest for attempted murder and getting Cliff and Cooper to rob the bank," Walker told Dan, who was groaning on the ground, clutching his shoulder. He quickly removed Dan's gun and searched him for other weapons. He found another gun and a couple of large hunting knives. "You going to regret this," Dan said angrily. "Maybe," Walker shrugged as if the threat didn't bother him in the least. "Get him to the jail and then get the doctor over there. Tell him he's got a bullet to dig out." Luke and Peter lifted Dan off the ground, handcuffed him, and dragged him down the street. Walker watched to make sure they had him under control, then turned. Cooper was standing near the banker with Cliff, who looked scared to death. Are you going to shoot me too? Cliff asked, his voice shaking. Walker went up to the boy and made him wait for a few moments for his answer. I'm thinking I won't, as long as you don't ever break the law again. I won't, I promise, sir, Cliff agreed quickly, looking relieved. Walker's heart softened as he looked at the boy. When he arrested his father, he knew Dan didn't have a chance to stay out of trouble. He had been taught well by his pa, but maybe it wasn't too late for Cliff. Chapter 10. It was late before everyone finally went to bed. The Reverend had insisted that Cliff stay at their house for the night, and Walker agreed, after making Cliff promise he would do what he was told. Clara was very glad the events of the evening worked out exactly as Walker had planned. She could tell that he had instantly become a hero in Cooper's eyes. He couldn't stop talking about what happened. It was more than Clara had ever heard him talk at one time. Her heart swelled with love for her brother. Even though they had had a scare that evening, she admitted to herself she had done the right thing, coming to Texas. Her brother was going to be fine with her love and Walker's guidance. The next morning, Walker insisted Cooper go to school. After he left, Walker pulled Clara into his arms. I'm so glad you were okay, Clara whispered to him. Thank you for protecting Cooper. I promise I will do everything in my power to not let anything happen to you or him, Walker promised. He held her silently for a few moments and then bent down as if to kiss her, but Clara stopped him with a question. Did you mean what you said a few nights ago, that you love me? She asked. She wanted to know if he had just said the words to make Cooper feel better, or if he really did love her. Walker nodded. I meant it. I do love you. Writing that first letter was the best decision I've ever made. Clara felt her heart fill with emotion. Was it love? She wasn't sure, but she did know that she cared for him very much. She looked up at his eyes, and they twinkled down at her. She reached up with her hand and brushed the lock of hair that always seemed to be in his eyes, then invited him to kiss her by pulling his head towards hers. She feeling all sorts of emotions, but the main one that bubbled to the surface was love. She had waited all her life for a good man to love, and now she found him. It seemed up until now her heart had been on hold, as if waiting, hoping. She now felt that love that she had waited all her life to feel. Clara did her best to show him that she loved him, and she never wanted to lose what was happening to her heart, to her soul. I have some news, Walker finally said as they eased away from each other. I know of a house that has been empty for a while. I talked to the owner a few days ago, and he agreed to sell it to me. Really? Clara asked, delighted. It's still a small house, but it is bigger than this one. Can I see it? She asked with excitement. Walker pulled some keys out of his pocket. I thought you might. He dangled them in front of her. Let's go now, Clara insisted, taking his hand and pulling him to the doorway. The house was situated just a block away from the schoolhouse, and Clara felt an instant liking for it. It was a small, square structure painted white, though the peeling paint revealed patches of weathered wood underneath, hinting it was overdue for a fresh coat. Walker guided her inside, where she was delighted that it had 2 floors. She saw a parlor and kitchen on the first floor with a small closet that she knew she would use as a pantry. As they went up the stairs, she stared at the blank walls and knew she would someday put pictures and paintings on those walls. The upstairs had 4 bedrooms. One of them was larger than the others, and she immediately knew it would be the room she would share with Walker. They would begin living as man and wife in this room. Cooper could choose which room he wanted of the other 3. The house had some worn furniture in it that Walker explained would come with the house. It's perfect, Clara told Walker as she walked to look out of one bedroom window. She could see a small space where she could plant a garden next spring. There was a large maple tree in the corner of the yard, and she could picture a wooden bench sitting under it. A few minutes later, they stood in the downstairs parlor, and Walker grabbed her hand. I have one more question for you. Clara looked at him and waited for him to continue. Now that Cliff's pa and brother are in jail, and neither are likely to get out anytime soon, how would you feel about having Cliff live with us? Clara thought for a moment and then nodded her head. I think that is a fine idea. He's a good boy. He just needs some guidance. I think it's a good sign he's befriended Cooper. They can share a room, don't you think? Clara asked. Walker nodded. Yes, because I think we will be filling up the other rooms very quickly. Clara blushed, instantly understanding what he was talking about. As Walker pulled her into his embrace again, she knew she had found her heart in Texas. She had lost her parents and became an orphan, but she and Cooper had the beginnings of a new family, one that she would thank God for every day of the rest of her life.